Welcome and good evening. Thank you for joining to tonight's artist talk. I will first introduce Lulu, who is hosting the artist talk with our special guest. And Lulu, maybe you can add some technical information for everybody to know what's going on.
Yeah. Hi, good evening. Thank you for joining. We muted everybody, so just to make sure that we have as little distraction as possible. But if you have any questions, please feel free to just post them in the chat, and then or also comments, obviously, and then we'll come back to that later. And also we're gonna record, or we are actually already recording the whole talk, so your videos are already turned off, but yeah, if you don't want to be seen, just make sure that your video is not shown.
Okay. Jamal, welcome. You just told us that you are very busy because you will start traveling. We are very grateful that you take the time to talk to us a little bit about Orlando and the project you are showing in this exhibition right now in Winterthur. But obviously we are super curious about you as an artist, as a cultural entrepreneur, as someone who is really busy with different roles and who is also working in, I don't know, that's also personal, but in my opinion, one of the most interesting cities maybe in the world, with a very rich cultural history and also still highly interesting political situation. So maybe we found, we always do that. We found some really interesting bits and pieces about your biography and what you are dealing with. You are working and living in Johannesburg at the moment, but you were also based in the UK for some time. And now you are really, a lot of people say that you are one of the most forward-thinking and influential cultural producers in South Africa. And you are the publisher and creative director of Bubblegum Club. This is something we can dive into a little bit later. If you agree, we would do some warm-up questions so we can get into the conversation.
Of course.
You can choose between two options. So the first one, without knowing that you start traveling, is actually traveling or staying in Joburg?
Traveling. Definitely traveling, because I haven't been out of the country since just before the pandemic.
Yeah, wow. Film or book?
At the moment, I'm going to say film, just because the last 3 weeks have been so crazy prepping for my travel. So I'm finding that it's nice to watch films and then just be able to have some time just to relax. So film.
Mm-hmm. Big cities or small towns?
I think I could do with small town, actually. I could totally do with the small town vibe, as long as it's got a body of water, whether it's an ocean or a nice dam or lake, and it's hot, of course. It has to be hot.
Okay, it has to be. Okay, that's good. Analog or digital?
Digital. That's an easy one for me. Everything is digital. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we agree. As an institution, we agree on that as well with you. Fast or slow?
Slow. I could also totally do with some slowing down. Yeah, it's what we were speaking about earlier, just saying how the pandemic has accelerated things so much. So could totally do with some slowing down.
Listening or speaking?
Listening. I'm totally a listener versus a speaker. Yeah.
Hot chocolate or cold beer?
Hot chocolate, because I'm currently not drinking.
Resistance or movement?
Movement. And movement, I guess, in cultural movement, but also movement as in like physical movement as well.
Thank you very much.
Cool, thank you. And yeah, thank you for inviting me. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Lulu prepped some material and we will see that shortly shared. It starts with material you sent to us. So yeah, we will
go.
Yes, so this is the first, this is like sort of the first visual. Would you like to start with this one, or we also have the next one you sent to us?
No, we can start with this one.
Perfect.
Yeah. So Ghostland is a web series created by Bubblegum Club, and we were interested in creating something in the music space, and we were interested in creating something that reports on South African music, that showcases South African music. And one of the things that we didn't want to do was to define it by, genre as an example, because South African music is very diverse. So we thought to create a universe. And our idea was to create this world called Ghostland. And Ghostland is sort of like a framework for South African music. So it's this idea, it's like what makes South African music interesting and unique. It's connectedness to spirituality. It's connectedness and the references and influences and the way it's been shaped by South Africa, like historically, from like our colonial past to our apartheid history as well. So Ghostland is like this world, and we create various forms of content that speak to the various parts of South African music. So we create podcasts, we create conversations, we record performances. So that's like DJ performances or vocalists performing. So various forms of content that speak to South African music, that reflect South African music. Ghostland is also very much, as I guess, a world inspired by Web3. Web3 is something that we are very interested in as Bubblegum Club. So it's a computer-generated world. It currently, well, the web series anyway, currently lives on YouTube, but it has the capability to be translated into a metaverse experience. So that's what Ghostland is in a nutshell. Yeah.
Can you maybe travel a little bit back in time and tell us how Bubblegum Club started, and maybe also how it transformed maybe over time with the practitioners or the people you are collaborating?
Totally. So Bubblegum Club started in 2015, and it started as a cultural intelligence agency. So we were kind of just doing research, looking to understand the art scene in South Africa, looking to understand practitioners within the scene and to understand audiences. And through the research that we were doing, we discovered that there was a gap for a platform that focused on practitioners that were working at the intersection of disciplines. We found that spaces that covered, people working in a more traditional sort of way, had platforms, but there was all of these practitioners who were working, in non-traditional ways, working at the intersection of various disciplines, who didn't have a platform to report on what they were doing and also didn't have a platform to support what they were doing. So we created a digital publication also under the name Bubblegum Club, and that was in 2016. And yeah, these are some of the covers that we created over the years. But I think at the beginning, our focus really was around spotlighting and platforming cultural producers in South Africa who were, working at the intersections, working non-traditionally, and who were also innovative in the way that they were approaching their practice and their disciplines. So yeah, these are, just some of the practitioners, and especially in the beginning, I photographed a lot of these covers. So if I look at this slide, I would say maybe 50% of them are photographed by me, and I'm also involved in 100% of them as if I wasn't photographing, I'm involved in production, or I'm involved in styling as well, or art direction.
Since I'm seeing Farka there already, that you also photographed for the exhibition Orlando, how did you approach the people that you were then featuring, or did they actually find you on your platform?
So these are people that are within our community, but we would approach them. So for us, the Bubblegum Club cover is a sort of, it's a spotlight, it's a way to recognize someone. In a way, it's like an award of sorts. It's to recognize and shine a spotlight on someone that we feel is deserving, but may have been overlooked because their work and their practice is a little bit difficult to frame, or is not conforming to traditional ways of working, and is not fitting into what's happening institutionally at the time. So this was sort of like a we see you, we recognize you, to all of these people that are on the cover.
And did you sort of, because now like you said, you were, yes, if you were not taking the photograph, you were styling, producing. How many people are sort of involved with Bubblegum Club right now? And do you have a physical space? That was something I was also wondering.
Yes, definitely. So I think we're 12 or even more full-time people now at Bubblegum Club. So it's grown quite a lot. And I'm not even mentioning all of the freelancers that we work with there. So the team has grown quite a lot over the last few years. And we do have, we've got a couple of physical spaces, in fact. So we've got an office space, we've got a creative space, which has a photo and video studio. It also has a podcasting and recording space. And we are busy setting up a library in that space as well. And then we have a gallery and a residency space as well.
We do have a video of that. Do you want us to show it?
Yes, please. So this is actually, I had my first solo with Bubblegum Gallery earlier this year. And this is, so this is my solo at the gallery.
Yeah, no, this is great.
I just turned off the sound. Maybe you can tell us a bit about the work that you were showing there, because it does look a bit like the visual language you're using is something that reappears also in other bodies of work of yours. So yeah, what is this about?
Totally, yeah. I think it's a development of my previous work. I think I, over the years, slowly and intentionally tried to move away from identity and expectations about what type of work I should create, as a Black South African male, and I started to move away from that because I felt it was like limiting, and I started to be interested in creating or operating as a crafts person, not as an artist, but as someone, as someone who has like a craft and someone who has like something that they repeat constantly, so this idea of going to a workshop and building a chair, and you have like a system and a methodology to build this chair. And I started to work in this way, and I started to work with objects that I was interested in. I worked a lot with the monoblock chair, and there's various reasons why also, I work with the objects that I work with, but it was very much around, choosing, objects to work with, and working with actors who, are my models. I call them actors now because it's people who, I feel as if they stand they are like, they stand in for me, you know, they're almost like bodies that represent me within the work. So yeah, there's all of these like, you know, specific objects that I work with. And for me, these objects become, you know, certain, materials. You know, in a way, for me, I see the monoblock chair as one of the materials I use. You know, these other materials, for example, like a plinth or, you know, the fabrics I'm using, these are all materials as well. And I've also looked to like generic, you know, or maybe not necessarily generic, because I think they are like imbued with a lot of like meaning and symbolism, but they are also very mass and ubiquitous and generic in that sense. And again, you know, this idea of like, you know, the generic or mass or ubiquitous, you know, was also feeding into the move away from identity and maybe the move away from, yeah, things that are particular and specific. So yeah, all of these objects, you know, have this generic quality, like the monoblock chair. I mean, it's ubiquitous, you know, around the world. Yeah, so it was like working with these objects. What else can I say about the work? Yeah, and then I mean, with this body, I think it's a little bit different from like the previous bodies, because I included, like, I started to work with new objects. You know, in the past I've worked with like bodies and actually a lot more color, and I've worked with yeah, so like one object and then more so much with like the actors and lots of color. And I think I've moved away from that for various reasons. Part of the reason being, I've always worked in a very practical way, and I think this idea of like the practical also really you know, feeds into the way that I'm working now. Yeah, so this is like the stuff that's on the screen now is the oldest. So it's the series before hashtag 0047BB, which is the one with the blue backgrounds.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting when you say practical, or like a practical approach. Can you tell us more about that? Because it's, I mean, it's an incredible distinctive aesthetic also regarding the, you know, the like almost neutral backdrop, but then you have the actors and those objects. It's pretty significant, all those details. And when you say practical, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much, I think you touched on it now, it's very much like this idea of like a visual language and developing a visual language. But yeah, coming back to this idea of the practical, it's working with things that are around me. So for example, as I said, the monoblock chair, it's ubiquitous, you know? And it's interesting actually how I started to work with the monoblock chair. And these, in a way, become studies of the monoblock chair. It's like, how far can I push the monoblock chair? You know, how can I twist and contort and, you know, see and work with the monoblock chair in a different way? I started to work with the monoblock chair because when I, you know, the earlier portraits, the stuff that you saw earlier, you know, the covers for Bubblegum Club, I slowly found that I really enjoy photographing people that are sat down, and I would then, you know, bring more and more chairs onto the shoot. And just by those chairs always being around me, they somehow started to become part of the practice. So I think, you know, that speaks this idea of like practicality, but also, you know, these, the clothing, you know, that you'll see, you know, in the photographs are clothing that's sourced from a vintage market that I've been frequenting, you know, over the last 10 years. You know, it's somewhere where I enjoy, you know, thrifting, and I enjoy, you know, buying clothing, and, you know, I'll pop in from time to time. And, you know, by virtue of just popping in, all of these like, you know, bright tights are always there, you know, and then, you know, I started to see them more and more and notice them and then pick them up. And then also in terms of the spaces that I work with, or the spaces that I work within, especially with this current body of work, the hashtag 0047BB. At Bubblegum Club, I mentioned that we have like a photo and a video like studio, and it's painted blue because that's where we shoot Ghostland. So it's like a blue screen so that we can key out the performers or DJs, and obviously drop in like, you know, these CGI backgrounds. And so I see this well, not every day, but, I'm often in the studio. So, I see, the blue. And, when I was thinking about, developing this work, I just immediately thought of that space. That space is there. I have access to it. So why not see what I can create out of, that space? So sometimes it's like the materials are presented to me, and then it's like, I guess it's a form of response. Like, how do I then respond, to that? So I think, it's, and again, I think that really, it works well with like, something that's a little bit less interested in like identity and concept. Of course, yes, there is concept, but yeah, I think it really like lends itself to the practice. So I feel like it's the practice is slowly like maybe maturing, it's starting to like, the things are connecting, because I think just in general, I am a fan of like working with what you have. I think the way that I've practiced for a very long time, and there's been different names that, have been attributed to this way of working, with CUS Group, an organization, or an artist collective that I was part of. It's something that we always spoke about, this idea of like piggybacking, and it's like working with what you have, because we are in an environment, with limited resources, and especially, as an emerging artist, I think anyway, your resources are limited. So
yeah, so it's also, sorry. Lulu, excuse me, please.
I find your approach to identity very interesting. You also keep mentioning it because on the one hand, you have these portraits that you show and that are super strong, that we also show in the exhibition, where everything is connected to identity and character, and like the parts and pieces that we maybe interpret in them. And then on the other hand, you shoot those images of basically bodies where you don't really show the face. And you also said earlier that you're trying to get away from the concept of identity as probably like what people expect you to do. So I find that gap really interesting in between those two bodies of work.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and it's been a move, to this. So you even look at the dates. This was in 2020, and the works that I produced with Faga was in 2019. So I think I've been moving in that direction, but I still love portraiture. I think I consider myself like, if I'm going to say I'm a photographer, like I would consider myself like a portrait photographer. Even the fashion stuff that I was doing, I wasn't calling it like fashion photography. For me, it was like fashion portraiture. So I've always been like fascinated with like portraiture, and I've always been fascinated by people and their personalities, and how through the work I can be in conversation with their personality. So it's something that I think I will always do, portraiture, but I think for this sort of work, the third body, and the subsequent works, that is for me, it becomes more of like a sort of visual art like practice versus like a photographic like practice. Photographic in the like commercial sense of like photography.
Yes, something I find still also striking is because you mentioned like, you are interested also in clothing. I mean, although you are not by all means sort of a classic fashion photographer or anything like that, but it's interesting because when we would move on to FACA, the clothing and the styling is obviously incredibly important. And it's also, we're gonna send you pictures because you one of the images is also part of our main visual for the exhibition, and it's actually being screened, like super large in train stations in Switzerland.
Someone sent me a picture at a train station. Yes.
And it's really interesting because we have a very diverse groups of visitors, and it's incredibly interesting how people actually react. You know, some of them are very interested in the details, like, oh, how does this makeup, why does it look like that, and where are all those details coming from? And obviously it's it's interesting to just have a look at the images, but actually it's also a very political work. It was shot in also a very interesting place in Johannesburg, and obviously you have worked with a duo with two really interesting people. And can you elaborate on the process and how this went? Because it's back in 2019, but I can imagine that it was also a process in order to create those images.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You speak about the details. You know, and I'm looking. I haven't seen this work in a while, and I'm looking at it now, and I guess it's bringing back some memories. And I think as a photographer and artist, I've always used fashion. You know, and so fashion. You know, like I speak about the chairs, fashion is one of what can I call it? I can't think of anything besides, like, I guess it's like it's one of the elements that like I draw from, or it's like one of like the bases of knowledge that I draw from, because I do have like a very in-depth knowledge of fashion. So I actually studied fashion design. So I understand fashion on like a theoretical level. And I think I use fashion, you know, in my work in a conceptual way. And I think, you know, that's why, you know, you have, you know, you see these details. For example, you know, the makeup that you're seeing now. Of course, this was produced in collaboration with, you know, like a makeup artist. And, you know, I don't know if I can't remember if there was someone who was doing hair, but actually, I think, there was someone who was doing hair as well. So it's also like it's like, how can you use that process, but then make that process like, or infuse like high concept into that process, you know. So I guess, again, you know, we're coming back to this idea of process, but the process of like, you know, coming up with like, you know, or we're saying we're doing a shoot, and then it's like, okay, cool, if you're doing a shoot, what do you need? Okay, and then you go through this like production process. So it's like all of these steps that you go through, and I find that quite interesting. And then it's like, how do I bring like, you know, high concept to that process? And I think, you know, that's, you know, it results in images like this, you know. So it's like, it's very process driven, but then, you know, how can I make that process like an art practice or more conceptual? But just to speak about that process, so the editors at Aperture reached out to me, and they were interested in telling Faga's story as part of the Orlando issue, because there was an issue of the publication, and then also of the exhibition, of course. And I had recently shown some work at the Aperture Summer Open, I think the previous year. And they essentially, you know, asked me if I'd be interested to create this body of work with Faga for the exhibition and for the publication. And of course I said yes. And I spoke to, you know, Faga quite a bit through the process. And I, you know, brought some of my ideas to them. And one of the things, I guess, one of the core things I think that I did take to them was a group called Threesome. And this was the first openly queer group of musicians. There were 3 in this group. So it was kind of like a boy band, but they were the first like openly queer boy band. It was called Threesome. I think it was, they were operating in South Africa in like the late 90s and like 2000s. And I was very inspired by their story, and, you know, spoke to some journalists who had been, you know, in and around, you know, the community at that time with Threesome, and just found out a little bit more about Threesome, because there's not too much, there is a bit, but, you know, not a lot of documentation. And I guess that's sort of like, there was an energy, you know, and there was like a mood that we were able to draw from. You know, I don't think if you look at like threesome and you look at these images, you know, I don't think it's something you'd be, you know, be able to say or connect. But yeah, there was like this mood and energy, and I guess like attitude, you know, that we drew from threesome. And we then, a big part of the shoot was going shopping. So we went shopping, all of us together, and I took, you know, pictures of the shopping trip as well, which was quite fun. And we went shopping, and we went to a very specific place as well. We went to Small Street Mall, and it's a space where it's predominantly like fakes of like high fashion and also yeah, it's kind of like a little bit like tacky and trashy, and the stuff, you know, is not super expensive there, but I mean the styles there are like outrageous, you know. There's like some really insane sort of like fashions. For example, you know, the top that you see on your left is from Small Street Mall. And yeah, so it's a space that was interesting to both myself and interesting to Faga. And I think it speaks to what I mentioned earlier about Bubblegum Club and Bubblegum Club sort of like positioning as, I guess, a group, an organization that's sitting in between spaces, you know, so it's not your sort of traditional like fashion space, but it's a super interesting space nonetheless. And, you know, myself and, you know, also Faga felt that, you know, it's a space that is culturally significant, but in more traditional spaces, it wouldn't be, you know, its cultural significance would maybe be overlooked for various reasons, because of its like geography, because of the audience that are in that space or purchased from that space, and also just because of the clothing and the framing and all of these things. So yeah, we so I think hence, you know, you mentioned like this work is political. You know, I think it's those sorts of approaches that you know, make it political. You know, to say that like, you know, we're not going to conform, you know, to like, you know, traditional like standards, you know, of like what beauty is or what is valuable. You know, we are going to determine that for ourselves. And I think, you know, that's going to Small Street Mall and shopping at Small Street Mall. And yeah, so we had a day of like shopping, and then we shot over one day. So it was, yeah, obviously we spoke a couple of times before, and there was one day of shopping, and then I think that was on the Saturday, and then on the Sunday we shot the work.
And sort of how did you learn about them and their practice? Because it's yeah, it's also like you were saying, you were also highlighting people or interesting collaborations. And yeah, I was wondering, how did you get to know them, and how did you get to know about their work, their practice?
Totally. So I mean, we are part of the same community. So I've known them since they came onto the scene. You know, I saw them coming onto the scene because I'm a little bit older than them, and I was, you know, always like, wow, you know, they're very interesting. In fact, you know, one of my first shoots in Joburg, I wasn't even shooting. I was casting, and I was the stylist, and this was in 2010, and I cast Desire at that time for the shoot in 2010, and this was, you know, I think Desire would have just recently finished high school at the time. And yeah, so they've been in and around my community. You know, I knew them before Faga.
So in the exhibition, your work is on the wall next to Zachary Drucker's work, who we also had the pleasure to speak to last week. And she photographed Rosalind Blumstein, who's represented as this kind of diva-like person. And I was wondering if like the images that you're making here, like the portraits, are very glamorous and like high res and very like high quality. And are you also kind of engaging in the idea of creating new icons and like new like
totally.
people
I don't think it's like it's a primary concern, but I think by virtue of my interests and the things that I draw from, I think it does that work. I think very much, as I was saying, I'm very interested in like fashion, and also I think what led me to photography was actually fashion photography. I was looking at a lot of fashion magazines, and I've always been interested in, I guess, like high fashion, and then looking at like high fashion photography. And of course, there's different types of fashion photography. You get the more grungier stuff, etc. But you also get a lot of this very high definition, well lit. I'm not going to say very, very, very beautiful, because I think all different types of photography is beautiful. But yeah, this very like high end, highly produced. It speaks to this idea of like production again, which is like where I draw my process. So for me, this idea of like really retouching and grading and making like beautiful colors. For me, it's like I guess it like reflects what I'm drawing from, and then I think by virtue of that, I think the like codes and like what a lot of fashion photography does, or most of it actually, it's to create like iconic, it's to make the clothing iconic, or it's often to like sell something as well, and I think this idea of like selling does come into the work, this idea of like selling the person, again there I think it's what I was saying about like portraiture, and how I'm very interested in portraiture, and how I like the idea of being in conversation with people and their personalities. And I think this very glamorous, high definition, very well lit, glossy, like aesthetic, comes from that. Yeah, and I think obviously there's the two images especially, and then the one on the left, I think is a little bit, the mood is a little bit more different.
Is it also a matter of access that you're using fashion, like the ways of fashion pictures and their ways of distribution, a different kind of access, maybe a different kind of audience that you can reach out to, as opposed to more fine art works?
So I don't think like primarily, but I do think that as one of the layer, or a secondary or tertiary concern, yes, I am very interested in audiences, and I'm also interested in creating things that are accessible, and creating things that that have like a visual language that can like appeal and speak to people, because by working in that way, as you're saying, I feel like it does, the work can reach more people or speak to more people.
Maybe if we sort of go from a project you did in 2019, and then actually it's a really nice journey, because you also showed us your newest or newer projects, and also the way your work has transitioned. Maybe, do you like to share a project or something you're really excited about, you work in the near future, or just maybe also a dream you would like to share with us? Because we always like to have this kind of perspective into artists' steps ahead. Maybe
Totally.
you can share with us.
Totally. To be honest, since my last show, which was at Bubblegum Gallery, was at the beginning of February, so it hasn't been a long time. So it's like I guess 2 months now. And I haven't thought, about any of my personal projects, since that exhibition. I think I'm still sort of, what's the word? Like, it's still settling in. Yeah, so I think I still need to just like let it settle in and reflect, on that body of work. I do have an exhibition in another solo in the Netherlands with Nomans they're based in Amsterdam, and that is in November, I think. So I will be creating a new body of work for that. And new body is just a development, I think. Well, and unless it changes, but for now, I'm still really interested in like, exploring the objects that I've been exploring, and continuing to develop that visual language. So yeah, I'm for now, I think that's something that's upcoming. But in terms of my personal stuff, I haven't been thinking much about it. But I am engaged with some projects because Bubblegum Club is also a collective. So we're an agency, we're a publisher, we have a gallery, but we're also a collective. So we also create works. We also create work, I guess. And at the moment, as I said, like we've got Ghostland, which is like Web3 inspired. We're also exploring like the world of like NFTs.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's some like, I guess, like collaborative or collective projects that I'm going to be a part of, but also just the day-to-day running of like an organization that has a publishing division, a gallery, and an agency is extremely taxing. So that really does take up a lot of my time, and I think that's also why I work in the way that I work, which is time, like these other resources that I've mentioned, or time becomes a resource as well. And I have to be very sort of smart in the way that I work, because I do have very limited time. So time is a huge constraint, but hopefully in the future, it's less of a constraint, because I would love to just spend a lot more time developing my personal practice.
Your personal projects.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. We have two super interesting questions. And I would like to start with one of our future colleagues. Patrizia is asking, do you consciously use the medium of photography as means of conveying self-empowerment?
As conveying my personal self-empowerment, or the self-empowerment of the people that I photograph?
I think it can be understood as both.
I think in my personal work, yes, I think I understand that the camera, the gaze, you have power as a photographer, as someone representing something, as someone creating something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I am aware of that, and it's a responsibility. But I think that's anyone who's creating, they have that responsibility as well. So yeah, it is something that I'm aware about, and I think about. But also, so I'm going to say yes, but also, with the work that I create, I also am very much interested in responses to the work, because for me, I make this work because it helps me helps me learn about myself, and it also helps me to develop myself. And I feel as if by putting out the work and getting responses, for me, is more important than my ideas. I'm just like one person, but like if you can get like feedback from many different people, like what the work means to them, what the work made them think of, that for me is so much more powerful, because it makes the work so much bigger. As I said, I'm just one person, and like obviously I have like ideas about my work and what it is, but for me, I make work to put out work. I'm not like someone who doesn't release work, because for me, it's like I can be in conversation with people. It's my way to, speak, and for people to like respond to me. And, I think the ways that people respond, they help you just develop, so much, and also understand yourself, and, look at yourself from like, a very sort of like outside or, top down sort of way. Because I think I am a person that works very much from like intuition, and, having that feedback, it helps me almost understand, like intuitively who I am. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
I think it does. Maybe otherwise we will get another one. But I was just thinking, it's also super interesting what we were talking about earlier. Also, the means of like digital communication, and the way sort of the internet has also changed and shaped photography in this sense that it's a networked medium. And it's true that it's also that for sure became easier to sort of broadcast faster to wider audiences more quickly, and also to create audiences for practices which wouldn't have been that easy actually to access maybe 20 or 30 years ago. But it's beautiful what you're saying, that in putting it out there, it also shapes the way your intuition is sort of shaping new work, or it's like this kind of dialogue almost.
Definitely, yeah.
And there's one question which is actually tying into that. Someone is asking, when did you realize your own identity, and how much of your own identity are in your visuals?
Yeah, I think I really realized my identity towards the end of high school. And I guess it's stuff that, I had to deal with, quite a lot, I think, from around the time I was sort of like 16 or 17, to the point I'm at now. And I think, this idea of like, the identity consumed me quite a lot. I would say my work was very identity driven, both in like photography, fashion, visual art, whatever sort of like space and medium that I was operating in, identity was a big part of that. You, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I'm sort of moving away from that now, because, I've spent so much time, reflecting on that, but also it got to a point, I think, where I felt like, it was like limiting, and that there was so much potential outside of identity, outside of race. I think that's most probably, obviously someone living in South Africa, that's one of the, biggest things that related to my identity that, I had to like deal with. As I said, it's something now that I'm finding limiting, and I'm really excited by the potential that sits outside of, identity and, those politics and, the expectations that come with those things,
Also, in regards to what you said in the beginning with our little like choosing game, where you said that you're rather a listener more than a speaker, is that also kind of why you chose photography or maybe even video as your medium, because it's also that you're like a watcher?
Yeah.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't even, I can't say like I chose photography. It's just, it kind of just happened, to be honest. And it's something that comes back. It's sort of like cyclical. If I think of like, so when I lived in London, I think I became very interested in photography because I was very interested in styling. So when I was in fashion school, I was involved a lot in styling, and I was working with photographers, but I wasn't photographing myself. And then when I, after fashion school, I moved to London for 2 years. And that's when, I started to, want the freedom to be able to, tell the whole story, to be able to, come up with like an idea for a shoot and then put the shoot together and then also photograph the shoot. And, I started shooting with like disposable cameras. So that I was actually analog at the time. And I then bought a DSLR, so a digital camera, and then I started to photograph there. And then I moved to Joburg. I continued photographing, but then I stopped for a while and I started to like photograph. I stopped using, like a DSLR and, planning like things. And I just, obviously by then I had like a phone with a camera and I was shooting a lot and I never stopped. I realized it felt like I stopped shooting, but I actually never did. And I continued with the phone. And then maybe these breaks are not so much like, they're not breaks, but they're like just changes in like learning about photography in the medium. Because I had also another period where I started to buy very old digital cameras. So like I wanted to shoot with digital cameras that had between 1 and 3 megapixels. And I started to create, very lo-fi photographs with these. This is obviously my earlier work. But I guess, yeah, so it's something that's just been there, So that's why I don't feel like I've chosen it. It's just something that I kind of like started doing. I was led to start doing out of, wanting to, create my own images or like wanting to express myself, I think. It was a way to express myself. And I think the cameras have become more and more accessible, and I think, that's been amazing for me. I think if I, lived in, the period where there was no digital cameras, I most probably wouldn't be a photographer. I don't think. So yeah, I think it's something that just, things coalesced, right place, right time. And it's a medium that helped me always to express myself. So I just continue to use it.
That's like the best last sentence for an artist talk.
Beautiful.
Hosted by a museum who is dedicated to photography or the photographic, let's say. Thank you so much for sharing your practice and your thoughts with us. Also, thank you for all the people in the audience for your time and interest. We really appreciate you. And yes, please keep us updated about your endeavors. And we are feeling now even more close to the images we are showing at the museum, which is always very special after having a conversation like this.
Oh, amazing. Thank you again for the invitation. And yes, I will definitely swing by Winterthur when I'm next in Switzerland.
Yes, get off the train this time.
Yeah. I won't be scared this time. I'll jump off the train.
That would be great. We're going to pick you up.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a good evening.
Will do.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.